Alright, hello folks. I just figured now would be the last time I could give a good tour of my Tasker scripts here, because I am going to significantly change it soon as I move it all into my own app. So here's the primary project here, Minder. And the way that this whole system works is currently in interfaces with two other apps. Originally, I kept track of tasks all manually in just variables, and the variables would be comma separated, and I would use a variable split to just split up the list of tasks, and the order that they were in was the order I had to do them each day, and that was that. And I say each day because they were mostly habits. And then I was like, alright, well, since it's taking longer than I thought to make this app, let me just go ahead and integrate with the only to-do list I use that actually has an API, which is Todoist. So the Todoist app, which is this one right here, has an API available in AutoWeb. And AutoWeb I eventually learned how to use, including making my own API, basically, because the Todoist one was out of date and didn't work, so I had to figure that out. But eventually, I got the Todoist one working, and I'm able to get the projects and get the items, and then split them into all of these variables here, which are under the sync project. So day order, due date, priority, project, project name, task ID, time limit, time minimum. Those time limit and time minimum aren't actually supported by Todoist. So what I do is I actually put them in, as you can see here, I put the time periods in the title of the task, and then I parse them out in Tasker to basically add them as metadata to that task. But yeah, so it's the sync task where I basically, whenever I am in the app, and this is an exit, as you can see here, so whenever I exit Todoist, I run the sync Todoist tasks, and that clears all of the arrays of variables if I'm starting off fresh. Otherwise, it just moves on to setting a few counters, and then calling this AutoWeb web service and looping through every single one of these. This was actually pretty challenging because I couldn't, the order that they come back is relatively unpredictable, so I'd have to somehow sort them by task ID. Well, the problem is task IDs, I guess, are the numbers that Todoist uses in the most modern version of the API. I guess there's been enough users with enough tasks on their platform now that the task IDs are super long, and those task IDs are actually bigger numbers than Tasker arrays allow. Little did I know. So some really old tasks were working just fine, and then some of them were not, and the reason was because the task ID was being truncated when used as an array. So I originally had array, and then the index was the task ID, which would have been fine, but now I can't do that. So I have my own index, which is this thing here, or rather slot, actually. Index is just for going through them, but when I put them down, they're slot, which is simply equal to the task ID. Here's some of that fancy pattern matching logic on arrays. So if it matches the item ID, then I put it in that slot, and that's the slot that I'm working with for the rest. So this works for existing items. You can see I have some pretty decent comments already. This works for new items. And let's see, variable set. So if I find out that I synced, and it's only going to, so that the Todoist API is a differential sync, so only what changed since the last time you synced comes down. And that's good because the task takes really long time when it's syncing everything otherwise, because the AutoWeb API requires a where is it? A sync token right here. And in our case, the sync token is this really long universally unique ID down here. And if that's not present, then we reset all these things, and we download every single item. But if it is, then we only get what's different from the last sync. So if it got deleted since the last sync, then we remove it here. We set the variable remove, which unfortunately means we need to delete every single aspect of that task, because there's arrays for each part of the task, the due date, the title, that kind of stuff. So that's why I store it that way. Next available items. All right, so new items are here. Oops. Okay. So Tasker has a bug whereby which if you try reorganizing any items in a big list, when you've collapsed one of these ifs with this thing here, then it just gets thrown for a loop. I guess because the actual list view indices get out of sync with the internal list of tasks of actions. So yeah. If I tried reordering some of these ahead of time, or right now while it's collapsed, then it actually threw one of them into the into the if statement way up here at a random place. So that's not what we want. So I'll just try not to accidentally rearrange any of them. Okay, so we were here. Next available item slot, and if variable set. Okay, so remove. So the item's ID, the item's index. So for every single aspect of the task, we clear the aspect of it right afterwards. As you can see, we set the ID here, and then right afterwards we clear it if is deleted is true. Here's where I pluck out the time limits, the timing. That involves some regular expressions, nothing too fancy. So we have a time minimum and a time limit. That's the 5 to 10 minutes. The 5 would be the time minimum, and the time limit would be 10. And then we clear the variable clear. What do we clear? So we clear time and we clear timing, because we should not be using those variables afterwards. Title slot. Why shouldn't we? Why does it matter if we use those? Timing one. Oh, right. Because then they'll stick around for when we loop through the next item. And if the next item doesn't have a timing set, we want it to be an unset variable so that we can detect whether that's set or not. Much rather deal with unset variables than variables that are out of date or applied to something irrelevant. So we set the title. This hasn't been working, but this is where I would run the sync Todoist projects in case I made a new project and this task happens to be in it, because I'm running the AutoWeb API only on getting task items rather than projects, because this whole loop can only handle items, and I tried handling both, but then the indices would be off, just the way that AutoWeb works. So I've just been running sync Todoist projects manually whenever I add a project, which isn't very often, but sometimes that can be a pain. But so I set the project of the task, and I used to set it to the project's ID. Now I look up, I have another array of project name, and then I look up that ID in the array of its name to find its name, and then set that name directly to the task rather than dealing with the ID, because I don't need that in this case. Alright, we'll set done, %slot. Okay, yes, if the item is checked, which it's probably not, because I believe oh yeah, no, I do sync checked items, but I don't handle them. I pretend they don't exist later on. So if it's not checked and it's not deleted, then we can delete, or if it is deleted, right, then we can delete the done variable. So instead of having checked to be 0, my variable called done, instead of having it be 0, it's simply unset if it's not done. Which clears up that variable screen a little bit, so I don't have a whole row of zeros when I don't have to, and also handles the null case just as well. It'd be nice if Tasker had better ways of handling null, like if Tasker dev is reading this, take a look at Elm, the language Elm, and the way that they just simply don't do null. Everything is either a value or it could be a maybe value, which means nothing or the value. So like you could say integer, or you could say maybe integer. So it could be a maybe 5, or I'm sorry, a maybe integer could be what this thing takes, and then it has to explicitly deal with the case that it comes out to be nothing instead of the number that I was expecting. So that you're never querying variables and just sort of using the name of the variable instead, which is what always happens in Tasker. You'll just start getting the name of the variable placed in places because it wasn't set at the time. So then there's no way to handle the unset case right within the same action. You always have to have two actions, one for if it's set and one for if it's not set, if you want it to be completely safe. But anyway, variable set. So due date. Let's see, search replace. So date completed. So the problem with the date completed that the API returns is that it's in this, what is it called, ISO 8661 format, the standard UTC format, but then they have this T thrown in there with time. Well, the problem is that doesn't sort correctly. If I want to sort by date, then I need the numbers to, the dates to come, and basically be able to sort them in alphabetical or ASCII order. And if I leave that T in there, then sorting them in numerical order rather, I throw that off because it's a letter. And so I actually also realized later on that on the rare case that in Todoist I set a non-floating time, so instead of just 9 a.m. for wherever I am, it's 9 a.m. Eastern, then it adds a Z at the end, and that threw me for a loop for a while too. So because task just didn't show up, but it turns out it was not being sorted because of the numeric sort. So basically I replace it with a dot, and Tasker doesn't know really that it doesn't know the difference between a valid number like 12.4 and an invalid number like 12.4.5. It just sort of treats the decimals the same whether there's more than one or not. And so that's what I do. I separate the date, first year, then month, then day, so that everything's perfectly in order, and then hour, minute, second, whatever. So the end result of that is that if I look at the here's a good example of one that throws that Z at the end. But so I replace the T in there, so the date gets separated only by a dot, and then it's properly sorted. But most of them have no due date time, so you can see that most of them like this are just dates. But I want the ones with the time to still be sorted correctly as, amongst the dates. So here we have 519, 830, 518, and you can see they're sorted by time. So that's working perfectly. The task finally. The date completed is set, and unless it was deleted, the task was deleted, or it doesn't have a date. Again, if it doesn't have a date, we don't put in any sort of blank value or anything like that. We just clear the variable completely. This was a diagnostic tool. I basically used Flash the way people use logging, which I'm sure is common habit in Tasker when things get a little more complicated. But setting slot to index to number whatever. This is the item ID, this is the title, this is the due date. Yeah. And there you go. Variable set Flash. Okay, so then if I run it, it looks like this. 0 new items, 0 updated, and then the current date. One thing to keep in mind, and here's what the projects look like too. I basically just duplicated that other task and only left the relevant variables here. Index to 1, same API, AutoWeb service. For project, items, project ID. Same thing. Items already exist, make the slot, otherwise, or use the same slot as whatever the ID was. Otherwise, I make the slot, and this is interesting. I use this array notation. Took me a while. This is a little tricky to get this right, but basically this tells me what is the number of the last filled spot in this array? What's the index of it? So if there's 50 items in it, then I get that number 50, and then this says +1, and I have do math. So basically go to 51. Which is what was required, believe it or not, instead of array add, because I'm not sure I remember exactly the reason, but it might have to do with the fact that sometimes there are gaps in the array, and filling those gaps every single time may be expensive, but not filling them meant that it could go in those gaps unless I said, okay, add it to the array at position 999999999. Yeah, so this is, I believe, is a lot cheaper, but we'll see. It might not be because of the matching, but I don't know. So anyway, yeah, that's how you sync the projects. If I were to run it, it looks like this. This one is just going through all of them, I guess. Every project that it, even though they should all already be in there. This one probably doesn't check for, there you go. Those are all the IDs of the projects. So if I look at, day order is one of them as well, so you can rearrange the tasks. These are the tricky things that I need to still implement. Due date, priority, project. So here's all the project IDs. You can see that there's what looks like 58 projects. Where's that 58 tasks? Yeah, no, there's 75. Project 1, 2, 3, 4, inbox. Okay, no, these are all related to the tasks. So yeah, project name, there we go. Yeah, so there's 58 projects. And so don't worry about these individual names of things that I put in there. They're just all kind of some personal stuff and some test stuff. And all the task IDs, the time limits and the time minimums, which do have default values if they don't find anything. I just did it strictly in minutes because turns out, if you think about it, most tasks are pretty well expressed in minutes in terms of the amount you do in one day. You know, you wouldn't really say, oh, this is a 30-second task. Like most of the time, it's usually multiple minutes. And if it takes like 3 hours, then it's fine if you want to express that as minutes because it's only like 100, and it makes it really easily comparable to, say 60. But, no task really takes like 15 hours of the day. Maybe, you go to work for 15 hours, but that's more of an event than a task. Title, let's see. These are the titles of the tasks, right? So, and then finally, Todoist in my project. What is this? Okay. All right. Not sure what that one is. Anyway. Oh yes. One last thing on the Todoist end before I end this video and basically assume in further videos that you know what the tasks are, where the tasks are coming from. Variable value %date_last sync is not equal to %myDate. So if it passes midnight, then the date last synced is not going to be equal to the current date. And so run an update. This is better than saying run a task at midnight. Why? Because the phone could be off at midnight, because sometimes tasks with specific times, profiles that launch on specific moments just miss the moment, and so don't fire. Those who are particularly astute might notice that this is not the variable for date. Normally it's %date. However, the way Tasker encodes dates is kind of useless. They say it's dependent on the platform, so I guess you could say that on this particular phone, the way that it encodes dates is rather useless. So I simply don't use it. I use a little JavaScriptlet function that converts it into the useful one that I showed you earlier, which is year, month, day, because that would be chronologically correct. Year, month, day, and then I add the time at the end. So if you have a look at that particular variable, my bad, I flew right past it. So should be right. Wow. Lots of P's. Okay, D to P. My date, 2019-5/18. And the place that I set that is in this task called update today, I believe, which is, no, maybe it's not. Update date at midnight. Okay, here it is. Update date. So at midnight, I do run this, which is to say what is today. So convert the date time to seconds, store result in %POSIX. That's a habit from Elm. They call it POSIX time. Just difference being in Elm it's milliseconds instead of seconds, but that's fine. And then I set the parameter to year, month, day, and then I run this JavaScript that I got online, which basically says, hey, figure out what the date is and format it as this. And then I flash that, so I can show you variable set my date, perform task, sync Todoist task, perform task update today. So I don't want to cause externalities right now, so I'll just turn those off and say run. And you can see there's the current date, and that will technically pop up at midnight. But you know, I wish I didn't have to do this. If a tasker dev is listening, I'd much rather, perhaps in the future, you could just normalize the dates. In fact, it might be easier to just store all dates and times as POSIX time, you know, Unix time, just in seconds since the epoch, and then have an action that converts it on the fly into what you want, even maybe converts it into the user's time zone. So you can do nice and easy things like add a day to a date or add a few hours to a time, or you know, stuff like that. Some of them require a time zone and some of them don't. And you won't have to be completely puzzled, because obviously internally I can compare two variables and see that one date is greater than another with the system that I have now, but I can't see that, for example, after February 28th is March 1st, you know, because that involves changing the whole number before it as well. So that's definitely not as easy to do. This, for example, this particular setup, I am using the tasks that are run today, that are due today, by seeing if they are if they match the date known, their due date matches the date that I set as today. Well, the problem with trying to do it with, let's say, days that are before today, is I can't really tell, you know, what if something was due yesterday, but due at midnight, but it's now past midnight, and well, actually, I think I'll give a better example of that in an upcoming video, since I'll be going over this. But yeah, it would be nice to have a better way to deal with dates and times. Okay. I think that is about it for the Todoist end of it. So the other app that the Todoist was newest. The other app that I implemented is this one called Time Balance, and that is the main one that I've always based it on, which is a time tracking app. As you can see, you basically just kind of start a timer for an activity, and it just keeps track of how much time it is. And so I've been using that since the beginning. The Todoist I only added in as I learned AutoWeb, and it could totally be done without it if you just want to set variables on your own, especially if you're using this system only for keeping track of habits and not keeping track of, you know, daily tasks. I added that in because you know, as you can see, I want to include other kinds of tasks as well in my day and just have it flow right into them after I've done, say, my morning routine. All right.